Myths and legends are, first and foremost, stories. In ancient and medieval times, poets, bards and seers recited these tales for a community or audience. Myths dealt with typically stories outside of human history and with supernatural beings. For example, the story of how Odin slew the giant Ymir and then used his corpse to build the world takes place in prehistory, before the universe, in a realm inaccessible to human beings. Legends tend to take place within human history and often have some factual basis. There were outlaws who adopted the name Robin Hood, while men like Fulk Fitzwarren share a similar story to Robert Fitzooth, Hood's original name. Like all good stories, myths and legends excite and thrill as heroes battle monsters while villains revel in their mischief. They are an escape from the mundane and set the imagination running off in exploration. These tales are not static. Beginning in oral traditions, each wordsmith brought his interpretation and embellishment to what were originally simple and strange narratives. In time, the great prophets, men like Homer and Dante, brought these traditions together and reworked their characters, storylines, and themes into masterpieces, such as the Odyssey and the Divine Comedy. Myths and legends continue to be retold and reimagined. Both J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings and George Lucas's Star Wars drawing inspiration from, and representing for a modern age, mythological and legendary tales. That myths and legends are ever-evolving points to something integral about them, which makes them important. John Ruskin observed that many myths are, on the surface, simple stories which can be enjoyed for their own pleasure. But what elevates the myth from the folk tale is that it has a meaning other than that which it has on the surface. That there is a deeper mystery is usually indicated by the presence of the extraordinary or unnatural in the story. St. George doesn't just defeat a rival knight, he conquers a dragon, and that he contends with a monster and not a man wakens in us a sense that there is something significant being said here beyond the confines of the tale. What Ruskin was getting at was that myths and legends have a symbolic element. Their characters and storylines represent visions of the inner life, social dynamics, and metaphysics. This is why a relatively simple tale can be unfurled into a grand epic. Great authors meditate upon and then unfold the deeper meanings contained within the original narratives. Roger Scruton has argued that the genius of Richard Wagner lay in his ability to discover the thought and feeling which is hidden within the harsh and bleak world of the Norse sagas. The Poetic Edda, for example, never explains why one of the Valkyrie chose to defy Odin's orders and attempted to save a man appointed to death from dying. Wagner reasons that she rebelled out of sympathy. In his opera, Brunhilde defends Siegmund from death because she is moved by his unyielding love for Sieglinde. He'd rather go to hell than join Wotan in Valhalla if it means that he shall be parted from his beloved. Their love is greater than eternal bliss. Wagner revealed the richer reality that lay underneath the surface of the Norse myths. Because of their symbolic qualities, myths and legends are more powerful mediums than rational argumentation for the cultivation of ideas and values. Christian theology claims that God is love and that he loves the world. This doctrine can be articulated as a logical series of propositions. However, at best this exercise would work an intellectual understanding of God's attributes and attitudes. It would be a belief which has no impact upon a person's core being, their passions and affections. It is the heart, not the mind, which defines us. Blaise Pascal once said that the heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing about, while Thomas Carlyle thought that it was how we feel about the world which drives our thoughts and propels our actions. So much of our decision-making is done on the basis of intuition and emotion, and even choices made according to rational deliberation require the force of sentiment to translate them into action. Stories speak directly to the heart. We are beings who exist in space, time, and relationship with the world around us. Abstract propositions do not share these qualities. By contrast, a narrative is a chronological sequence of events which involves characters and objects interacting in a variety of environments. They are clothed with the same concreteness that we experience in all our waking moments. As such, these stories invite us to inhabit a new set of sensory experiences. In myth and legend, we are called to imagine fantastical events and, in so doing, we have encounters we have never had. I have never seen a dragon, but I can visualize in my mind St. George battling the serpent. I can see the blade swishing through the air. I can hear the rumble of the dragon's breath. I can smell and taste the sulphur from his fiery stench. I feel the heat of his maw. In turn, these impressions evoke specific emotional responses. A dragon arouses one set of feelings, a giant or vampire another. If it were represented musically, you would hear the difference. A dragon's greed and subtle malevolence contrasted with a giant's uncouthness and a vampire's unnatural darkness. And we feel the difference too. Myths and legends move us. This kind of intuitive response creates a profound form of knowing, an effective understanding below rationality. At a surface level, we experience, in an imaginary way, the events of the story. We respond emotionally to these events. But due to mythology's symbolic aspect, these imaginations and feelings are also responsive to that which is represented by the myth. Our emotional response to the dragon is also an emotional response to what the dragon symbolizes. As such, through our experience, we develop an effective or intuitive knowledge of those ideas and values that are buried within the tale. For C.S. Lewis, this meant that myth and legend were a kind of bridge. They allow the reader to taste reality, to experience, in a chronological and concrete manner, universal and abstract principles. It goes further. Lewis argued that all stories try to represent, in a sequential manner, that which is atemporal, ideas and values. He thought that though many stories start out strongly, many fail to maintain their symbolic character as the narrative progresses. However, I think the chronological, spatial, and relational character of a narrative elevates its experiential quality in a way unforeseen by Lewis. We never experience an idea or value in a pure, isolated form. We encounter a glimpse of them in concrete situations, within which they come into contact, and sometimes conflict, with other notions and sentiments. To fully experience a theme, we need to emotionally engage with it across a variety of contexts in conversation with several other themes. An idea or value does not evoke one emotion, but a sequence of affections, and it is by following its emotional shape through these different situations, explored in a variety of narrative contexts, that we come to an experiential knowledge of it. For example, Take the emotional journey characters and readers go on when reading or seeing the Battle of Helm's Deep in Tolkien's The Two Towers. The beleaguered defenders of Rohan, poorly trained and ill-equipped, are surrounded by 10,000 Uruk-hai who are bent on destroying the race of men. Many men have been butchered, and the horde keeps on coming. The remaining soldiers have been pushed back to the Great Hall, and they are too few to defeat the ravenous monsters outside. When the remaining men die, the women and children will be like lambs to the slaughter. All that is left to do is to make one last charge, one last act of defiance, to show courage and indomitable will in the face of inevitable defeat. We, the reader, feel admiration for this valiant heroism, but ultimately sorrow and despair at the oncoming reign of darkness. At that moment, when the king plunges into the enemy and all hope is lost, a rider appears on the ridge, dressed in white and upon a white horse. Then several knights emerge from behind him. It is Gandalf, and he has brought deliverance. From the jaws of defeat, victory has been snatched, the tide has turned, and we have new strength to see out the day. Characters and readers alike feel overwhelming joy and pulsating hope. This narrative structure is what Tolkien called a eucatastrophe, a sudden and unexpected twist where the heroes, facing ultimate and final defeat, are miraculously rescued. We cannot experience the idea of eucatastrophe by only feeling anguish at the plight of the heroes. We can't feel it either if we only feel the jubilation of deliverance. It is the sequence of feeling despair and then of joy that allows for a full taste and appreciation of the eucatastrophe. We feel ecstatic elation because we have felt the very depths of hopelessness. The narrative form allows us to, in a rich way, encounter the idea in a number of contexts, and thus allows us to feel its truth as it's represented symbolically in myth and legend. When thinkers meditate upon the sentiments aroused by myths and legends, they begin to develop new abstractions. Several readers and listeners share approximately the same feelings in response to the story, and according to their knowledge, experience, and abilities, they articulate aspects of this intuitive reaction in different ways. This formalizes in rational form what was felt in response to the story and, as such, reality, or at least what is presented as real. This helps the process of fine-tuning our response to the story, thereby repeating the cycle. So to bring this back around, we see this dynamic in practice with the Christian doctrine that God is love and loves the world. For St. Paul, this idea is best seen in the death of Jesus Christ. The story of his suffering and crucifixion best conveys the doctrine. It works in the reader not only an intellectual set of notions about God, but a deep-seated feeling in response to the events of the gospel, and as such, its representation of what it means to say that God loves the world. The meaning of these stories extends to the space, time, and relations we experience in the real world. In England, the names of our landscape are embedded in the fantastical. Albion was the domain of Albini, mother of the giants. Britain, the kingdom of Brutus, descendant of those who fled the destruction of Troy. Glastonbury Tor is connected with King Arthur and the Isle of Avalon, while Sherwood Forest is the domain of Robin Hood and his merry men. Our calendar is tied to the mythological. The weekdays are named after the sun, the moon, Tyr, Woden, Thor, Frigg, and Saturn. Our holidays are structured around the Christian festivals of Christmas and Easter, which themselves correspond to the pagan celebrations of yesteryear. Finally, our peoples find their identity in such tales. Hengist and Horsa are the legendary origins of the Anglo-Saxons, just as Abraham is for the Jews. A people symbolize their character, culture, and mindset in the myths and legends they tell, and in turn, these infuse their land, their time, and their kin with moral and spiritual significance. Scott Mannion would probably go further and say that these tales convey the true, authentic being of the people and their relationship to the world. In turn, myths and legends break forth into rite and ritual. The Jews reenact the Passover, recounting how Yahweh delivered the Hebrews from Egypt. Christians rehearse the Last Supper, Christ's final meal before his crucifixion. Romans celebrated Saturnalia and revelled in the mischief of the King of Chaos, while modern pagans welcome the solstice by gathering at Stonehenge. Men dressed up as Robin Hood for May Day celebrations, while the coronation of the British monarch carries the symbols of pagan and Christian mythologies. Through these and similar actions, communities participate in the original stories, framing their own lives with its external trappings and, more importantly, its deeper meanings. They thereby have an even greater experience of a myth's ideas and values. As a consequence, they more fully come to know, and at an intuitive and effective level, the vision of reality painted by myth or legend. So, why are myths and legends important? They address our emotions, the heart of our being. This is because they convey in a concrete and chronological form ideas and values about the inner life, social dynamics, and metaphysics. This allows us, beings who are concrete and exist in space, time, and relation, to feel and experience a vision of the world, and so to more fully know an idea or value than reason would allow us to. In turn, legends and myths decorate our experience, providing an interpretation of our reality in terms of space, time, and relation. Myths and legends can even become the catalyst for rites and rituals which frame communal life and provide greater opportunity for experiencing their vision of reality. Given these conclusions, there is a premium upon finding truthful myths and legends. These tales come from a variety of peoples and cultures, and they have been reimagined by authors with different sets of values, and they have different worldviews. While there may be points of crossover, there can be significant disagreements. Although all myths and legends give us an experience of a vision of the world, they do not offer a common interpretation of reality. As such, some may work in us truthful and edifying intuitions, others illusory and darker feelings about the world. It is our responsibility to find and follow those myths and legends which bring us into harmony with the material, moral, and sacred order. That is the quest laid upon us all.